Here. There we go. Well, appreciate everybody joining. After a week away, I hope I remember how to do this. And a couple of people asked me how it went at the dentist, and it went about as well as you could expect. The guy was absolutely wonderful, and my mouth felt good, other than the thing of having somebody cramming their hand in your mouth for an hour, and then your jaw hurts from being open so wide. But other than that, it went great. We're going to talk about Tokyo Disneyland today. Originally, I was going to do Disney and mid-century architecture, but the fellow that I came up with a talk together with is in Beijing, stuck finishing up a theme park project over there, and he's going to be back here probably about 2 weeks, and we'll look forward to doing it then. For everybody on the screen, how many people have been to Tokyo Disneyland?
Sadly,
Okay,
none.
we see a few. And how many people worked on Tokyo Disneyland? Okay, a few. So for the folks that worked on it, please help me fill in any gaps or issues or anything that I come up with. I left Disney in 1982 for Warner Brothers, and Tokyo Disneyland did not open until 1983, so I missed the very beginning of it. When I was thinking about leaving Disney, one of the things they tempted me was, "Hey, if you stay with us, we'll let you go to Tokyo Disneyland and do that." And Warner Brothers said, "Hey, if you come to us, we'll send you to Tokyo." So since Warner Brothers paid a hell of a lot more, I decided I would do that. But for the folks that have not been there, it's a very interesting project. Why is my video quality so poor? I don't know. Like I said, sometimes if I get real close to the camera and then get back again, hopefully it gets better. I do not know why it's fuzzy. Nope, not better. Well,
Your
you got to
lens may need
think.
cleaning on your camera.
What's that?
Your lens may need cleaning on your camera. That
I
might
don't
be
know.
it.
It was working fine last night. So you'll see
Okay.
me blurry, and then we're going to look at Disneyland anyway. So, but for the folks that have not been there, it's a very interesting mixture of the two U.S. parks. They had come up with the idea of doing the Tokyo Disneyland project, and there was an awful lot of dissension within the Disney organization at the time to do it. Uh, Most people don't realize that Tokyo Disneyland is actually owned by a different company, the Oriental Land Company. And there was a lot of concern that if they built this and it wasn't run to the Disney standards, that it could bring down the Disney name. There was also the concern, what if they built it and nobody came? What would be the impact of the Disney brand? And there had been another attempt by a different company to build their own Disneyland in prior years. It was called Narita Dreamland. And it's if you ever get a chance to look it up online, this other company came over, studied Disneyland, and built their own copy without Disney's involvement. Matter of fact, Disney and they got into a very lengthy lawsuit. But that was a real cheap done, and it doesn't say three-quarters of the quality that Disney would have done a project like that. And it looks shabby, and people were concerned that that would be the same thing with Tokyo Disneyland. But they eventually came to a contractual agreement. It was supposed to cost something like 100 million yen. When it was done, it was 180 million yen, so only an 80% cost overrun for the beginning. And it wasn't so much a cost overrun that people didn't know what they were building, what they were doing. They just kept saying, "I'd like to get that too. I'd like some of this." Well, that would look really nice in the park. So as you go through it, you'll see buildings that you would swear you were at Walt Disney World in Florida. You'll see others that you would think you were sitting out at the Disneyland. Let me just bring a check here. Okay, so basically, like I said, I got over there in 1985, and we're going to be looking at those pictures first. But I just want to mention what an interesting project this was for my own involvement. I worked on some of the computer systems, which was my thing at Disney at the time. I had a very interesting situation. I was sitting in a meeting with a whole bunch of the executives, Card Walker and Don Tatum and these others, and they had hit a roadblock with the Japanese government in trying to get certain things brought into Japan for the shows. One of the things was the glass eyeballs for the audio animatronic figures, and another were the guns for the Pirates of the Caribbean. The Japanese government was refusing to use American glass eyes and wanted to use Japanese glass eyes. People may not realize that the AA figures use glass eyes of human quality and not just some plastic thing stuck in there. And this meant if you were going to build the figures with Japanese eyes, you were going to have to build the figures in Japan, because we first looked into, do we take the Japanese eyes over here, put them in the figures and bring them back? And the Japanese wouldn't accept that they had not possibly swapped out other components. So there was this big argument going on about eyeballs, and obviously having audio animatronics without eyes would be a real challenge. The other thing was they didn't want guns brought into the country. And we're saying, look, the guns for the pirates are obviously not real weapons. You can inspect them left and right, but you can't they wouldn't want to bring them in. So we're sitting in a meeting one day, and Card Walker asked, anybody have any ideas about this? And we all shook our head. No clue. And he said, my God, I think we're going to have to go to the State Department in this. And like an idiot, I said, I do know somebody at the State Department. And it's one of those things where every head in the room turns and looks at you, and you're, oh God. When I had started my job at Disney, setting up computer security, I had no idea what I was doing. So I had convinced Disney to send me to Washington, D.C. I met with people from the IRS, Department of State, Treasury, all sorts of these other organizations to get their information on how their computer security worked. And I had met this guy at the State Department, Fred Burton. So on a whim, I called up Fred and said, is there anything you could help us with? And you talk about timing being everything. Fred was on a multi-department project that year where they would take American government agencies and try to show them what American industry was doing and see what roadblocks they had. So it was this whole big project put together by the Department of Commerce and other organizations. And they said, if we can come out and tour the Disney facilities, we'd love to see what you guys are doing, and could you get us a tour at Disneyland? And said, okay. So arranged it, and the day before they came to WED, they were out on an oil platform out in Santa Barbara. And back at this time, for my fellow folks from WED, you remember we did not give tours. It was not a e-ticket attraction, and it was very closed. But they all came in. There were about 40 of them. We put them up in the Holiday Inn in Glendale and put them on vans, took them over to WED, took them there for morning. We came in for a quick breakfast out on the patio, took them around. They all had to sign NDAs. Then we put them on the vans, took them down to Disneyland. We had lunch for them at Club 33, which was real interesting, because when the bill came for lunch for 40 people at Club 33, I was very glad I invited the company's treasurer with us. Because it was way over my limit. We gave them a goodie bag with their name on mouse ears and copies of stuff to bring home to their kids and everything, and they all left. And about 3 months later, I get a call up to Card's office, and went up, and he said, hey, we just heard from the State Department that they worked out that we can bring the eyeballs in, and they think they can find a way with the guns. So after that, for about the next year, every time I saw a Card in the hall, he would call me Mr. Eyeball. So it was, I guess, not the worst nickname you can come up with, but you'd be walking down the hall and he'd wave and say, hey, Eyeball. And I think people were you with would all try to figure out what was going on. So anyway, with that, I'm going to show two quick videos to set the mood. One's a clip. I'll start with the first one from CBS News. And let me just start sharing the screen here. Share screen, okay. Share sound, all right, share. And now I just have to get the video going. First one here is a little clip from CBS News in February before the park opened.
Sure, Japan has exported lots of cars and steel and other things to the U.S., but guess what the U.S. has exported to Japan? A little bit of Americana. That's what Gordon Josoloff has details.
Call it Mickey Mouse Mania or Disneyland Disneyness. Whatever, Japan's got it. Tokyo Disneyland opens April 15th, and its backers' biggest worry is it will be too popular. So unlike Disneyland in California or Walt Disney World in Florida, Tokyo Disneyland will require reservations in advance.
We don't want to overcrowd the park. We don't want to exceed our capacity here.
Once inside the sprawling Never Never Land, larger than either U.S. counterpart, an expected 10 million people a year will delight to traditional Disney fare, Cinderella's Castle, Tomorrowland, and Country Bear Jamboree. Japanese lyrics and some, not many, Japanese signs are among the few changes the Disney people had to make in transferring Walt Disney's Dream World to Japan. They were easy. A little harder was getting Japanese dancers seeking work at Tokyo Disneyland to sing Disney hits that cannot be translated. Some Japanese, though, are pretty good at Disney ditties. These kids are in a TV special promoting Tokyo Disneyland. The park's super sales job also includes a heavy schedule of TV commercials.
Tokyo Disneyland 4月15日いよいよオープン
What's really super to the Disney company is that it didn't have to invest 1 cent in the $600 million extravaganza. Japan's Oriental Land Company, backed by railway and real estate interests, put up the money and will pay Disney royalties. But while this Disneyland is Japanese-owned, it's Disney-operated.
When you come into Tokyo Disneyland, you're in Disneyland. You're not in Japan, you're not in the United States, you're in Disneyland.
Gordon Josloff, CBS News, Tokyo.
Okay. There we go. Zoom quit unexpectedly. I can still see everybody, so hopefully they're still connected here. Yeah, still weird error message popped up. Anyway, that's just, we'll go and do the other video in a second, but he kind of gave you a feel for it. You saw a different piece of it. As mentioned before, they came out, they went to both of the US theme parks and went around with a shopping list and picked some of this and some of that. Then they embedded people from OLC into the Disney organization. Some came out with us at WED to, work on the design aspect. Others started working in the Disney theme parks, so they got an idea of what the Disney way of doing things was. So it was a massive effort. It was really a crazy time because for most of this time, Epcot was still very much underway. So if you look at an organization that was bursting at the seams, you had all the work going on to build Epcot, and then you had to build another theme park, but you had to do it, many thousands of miles away. And with the language difficulty, it became a real task. Of course, Disney rewarded everybody as soon as it was all done by laying off 80% of the people that were involved. So it was unfortunate timing in that regard. But it was an interesting experience if you got to work with the people from it. And there's still a number of people that became, virtual pen pals or whatever, still in touch with them. But Carol worked on it in both projects. She was in figure finishing over at Tahunga. And maybe when we do the chat part, you can talk a little bit about getting some of that done. So I have one more video, which now they finished the construction. We're going to get ready to go into the actual opening of the park. And I won't play the entire video because it just drags on and on at the end. But we'll start with the second video here in 1 second.
Long-awaited day has arrived, the Tokyo Disneyland Grand Opening Celebration Ceremony. The afternoon ceremony began with an overture of classic Disney melodies, performed by a 150-piece symphony orchestra and a choir of 200 members. Members of the executive staffs of Walt Disney Productions, Disneyland, and Walt Disney World have come all the way from the United States to Tokyo for the event, as well as many special guests from government and industry who visited the park for the ceremony. Among the honorees were Mr. Fukuda, Japan's former Prime Minister, 63 years ago, Oriental Land Company was established in 1960. They spent over 3 years in the construction of Tokyo Disneyland, the first Disney theme park outside of the United States. The total area consists of over 114 acres. The ceremony was emceed by E.H. Eric, well-known television personality. Mr. Card Walker, chairman of the board of Walt Disney Productions, and Mrs. Walker, along with Mr. Masatomo Takahashi, president of Oriental Land Company Limited, and his wife, watch as Mickey Mouse and other Disney characters escort the 3 Disney ambassadors to the stage for their greetings. Miss Yaiko Terasaki, Miss Mindy Wilson, and Miss Cynthia Pleasant. Greetings from Mr. Takahashi, Mr. Walker. Congratulations from Mr. Abe, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and from Mr. Setoyama, Minister of Education, complete the guest speeches. To the tune of How Do You Do and Shake Hands, the children of Walt Disney Productions Japan employees and the famous Disney family of characters enter to shake hands with the invited guests and add their happiness to the ceremony. It's a Small World comes to reality as the voices of the children from Japan, America, and other nations join in chorus. Members of the girls' chorus from Seisen International School, and the boys' chorus from St. Mary's International School combine to fill the air with the sound of children's voices. symbolize the hopes and dreams and efforts of all of those who created Tokyo Disneyland, thousands of balloons are released into the skies above Cinderella Castle and the entire theme park.
I'm going to end the share there. Let me stop the video on my side 1 second. The balloon footage goes on for about another 2 minutes. I think whoever the photographer was determined to catch the last balloon going out of sight. So it goes on and on. But I thought you might like to see some of what was going on at the beginning. I'm going to jump now to 1985 and take a look at some of the pictures here. So let me bring that up in a second. Okay, and we have to go back here and share the screen. I need a technical support staff for some of these things. Okay. So basically, as I mentioned, I went over to Japan. Oh,
Audio. Can anyone else hear Bill?
No, sir.
Let's see if I can figure out what's going on.
You can see under Bill's picture, his microphone is the mute line across it. So he got muted somehow.
I'll ask him to unmute.
sorry, I somehow getting all sorts of error messages from the Zoom app quitting, and it switched me over to the other monitor. So, and the dog took advantage of coming in here. So if I get distracted, we'll see why. So, okay.
It helps you're back in focus now.
Oh, good. That's all it took, huh? So let me get back to share screen, and we'll give this another try. 1 second, I got to bring the photos back up. Okay, and share screen. I picked a hell of a day to stop sniffing glue.
Whose idea was it to build in Tokyo? Was it the Japanese or Disney's idea?
Oh no, it's Japanese. They wanted to do it. They, like I said, they really had to press hard to get the American, the Disney folks to do it. There was tremendous amount of problems with folks from Disney that just didn't think this thing would ever work. So let me see what happens if I share a screen now. Do we see a picture? Welcome to Tokyo Disneyland.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So as I mentioned in the video, you had to get reservations for the beginning. I think that lasted for about the first year or so to come out and get tickets. And then it lasted for all the major holidays that they would have over there. Just like now, everybody is going crazy out here trying to get tickets to Disneyland as it's reopening. It was very tough to get into Tokyo Disneyland. Luckily, I got there about 2 years later, and on the average weekend, it wasn't too much of an issue anymore. For folks that don't know it, this was all built on reclaimed land. About 6 years before this park opened, it was a giant piece of Tokyo Bay that was all done with landfill piled in there. So it was a massive undertaking, just like if you were on my talk about the 39 San Francisco World's Fair, they literally built the land that they could build the buildings on. So I went out with an interpreter. My Japanese is very, very rudimentary and can get me into trouble because nobody can understand me. So luckily I had an interpreter, and we took the train out there and had some fun. So we're gonna go walking in. And one of the first things you see when you get to the main entrance is that Main Street USA is not called Main Street. There's a few different things. They have a World Bazaar, and it's got a covered glass over the center of it. Pretty much like the one of the World's Fairs back in London, the Crystal Palace Exposition, very much like it. But this is what made it interesting. You saw some things that were familiar and some things that were totally new. We'll go taking a walk again, just walking up to the main gate. And again, very different looking than Disneyland's main gate because you have a big building in front of you and you're not able to see the castle, kind of blocks the view. But it was well done. So we're going to take a walk inside. And as you go inside, you get the familiar looking buildings of Main Street, but a roof over it. And they said they built the roof over it because of the weather in Japan can be bad. It's kind of interesting. I've never really subscribed to that theory because the rest of the park is all out in the sun or rain or whatever, even snow at times. So I'm not entirely sure why this section had to be done. One person told me back at the time so they could have private parties and that sort of thing held under the thing at night if somebody wanted to rent out that part of Disneyland and not have to operate the rest of it, just use it for ambience, for background. Then I get another view and you can see the castle further on down the street. As you went through it, you saw that there was a real mixture of Japanese faces and American faces. They brought over quite a few people from the United States to work there, and what Disney would call a face character, something like Peter Pan or some of that. A lot of the characters were played by Americans, and in other cases, some of the singers, dancers, and that sort of thing. You'll see mixtures of mixed Japanese and American performers in the same thing. I got a kick out of this one, the bicycle piano. He literally rode down the street pedaling the bicycle, pedaling the piano, stopped and played the song for a few minutes, and then he went further down the street and played again. It was kind of a neat, different thing. Some of these things were neat because they were new. I had been to Disneyland and Disney World so many years, and when you come around the corner and you see something like this that's different, it was kind of fun. Things that look very familiar, Main Street Cinema, 6 great Walt Disney cartoons, and you walked in and they had them playing. And this was, I think, one of the first things I went into that showed it was a real interesting situation. Some of the things were in English and some were in Japanese. So if you went into these cartoons, they were not playing the Japanese version of a soundtrack, they'd have the original version going. As you walked out of the World Bazaar down there, you'd swear looking at this, boy, I must be in Florida, because they directly copied Cinderella's castle from Florida. In later years, when we go back to it, they added a nice attraction down in at the basement level of the castle. But this is, again, just kind of interesting, sort of deja vu. You're kind of jet lagged, you're in Japan, you walk through the gate, and all of a sudden you're in Florida. Whereas Jim Cora said, you're at Disney. You're not really in the United States. But again, anybody that's been to Florida will feel very familiar with this particular view. Looking back at World Bazaar. And again, you might think this was Walt Disney World, the Crystal Palace restaurant, the little gazebos that they had off to the side with the food, popcorn vendors that are. You got the omnibus riding down the street there, the double-decker bus. Looking over here, Tomorrowland. The fountains, when these were built originally in Disney World, they had massive fountains that came jetting down out of those towers. They were eventually turned off for maintenance and cost reasons at Disney World. They built these out at Tokyo Disneyland, but I don't believe they ever had water in them. Any of the times I was there, the water was never running. So they probably just went for the look, but realizing what it was costing to run them at Disney World, they did not run them there. But great classic design of going into Tomorrowland. Just more views proving that you can take something magical and transport it. In Space Mountain, it had to be there in Space Mountain. Big issue, did you build the Disneyland version of it with 1 track, or did you build the California, the Florida version with 2 tracks? 1 track is cheaper, so you can go with that. Sponsored by Coca-Cola, just like in the United States, they had gotten off to a lot of outside companies to help pay the $600 million that it cost to build the park. So you'll see some attractions sponsored by US companies like Coca-Cola. Others are done by, say, Kikkoman, soy sauce, different Japanese entities. You also had a mixture between the 2 parks. You had some new ones, and we'll go into Meet the World, a different show, and a later moment we'll get a closer look. But this was a show, I think it was Panasonic was the sponsor of it, a history of Japan using audio animatronic figures. The Skyway, of course, had to be there. What was nice about this particular Skyway, it was air conditioned. You can see the cabins are glass enclosed. This made it nice that nobody could throw anything out of the cabins and make a problem for people as had been in the US parks. And you got some great views of it. The Astrojets looking the way they should look down at the end of the street, modern, looking something right out of NASA. Interesting again that they would so duplicate everything that even down here, although this is a Japanese theme park, what's written on the side of the rocket but USA, because it was on the US versions, it was going to be on their versions. We had square-shaped trees at Disney World. They had square-shaped trees at Tokyo Disneyland. So they went way out of their way to duplicate and bring. They were smart. They took what was successful at both parks and did a shopping list and brought them both back. It worked well. So here you can see we've got the Grand Prix Raceway down below. You've got the Skyway up above. The rocket jets are going out there and having a great time. Very, very successful theme park. Here we're getting ready for Small World. They had taken the California version of the Small World facade. They had added some color to it. Back at this point in time, our facade was pretty much white was the dominant thing. Here they went for more sparks of pastel colors in that. But they went with the same idea of the clock with the figures that would pop out. The numbers would come out and set the time. The figures would come out on a turntable dance free, and then those two blue and white doors in the center would open to show the time. They also had a large stage area in front of Small World that was used for performances. And if you look down below as the clock is going, you can see there's Pluto, two of the chipmunks, Goofy and everything, doing a stage show at the time, entertaining people before they went in to see their attraction. And I got a kick out of this. You know, we've all had hats that say Bill or Don or Irv or whatever going out to the theme parks. And they transported the idea, and they were selling Mickey Mouse ears like mad over there. Very, very popular item. Again, here you see some American performers singing and dancing. It was interesting, you know, we know about the accents. Every language I speak with a terrible foreign accent. And I do not speak many languages, and I speak none well, but I speak with an accent. It surprised me that the singing, so much of the Japanese accent carried through, as you saw in the videos. So they ended up bringing a lot of American performers over, and I actually talked to some of them about their experience of working over there, and they were just loving it. There was the trouble at times they could not talk to some of their other people up on the stage without an interpreter. A number of them were there long enough they were picking up Japanese. Others had just gotten there shortly before and were still bewildered by what was going on. So it was an interesting experience for them working in a multi-language and multicultural setting like that. And as I mentioned, different attractions sponsored by different companies. I believe this was a soy sauce company, I'm not sure. Topiary figures brought over. Neat little designs. They took the Walt Disney World version of the Haunted Mansion facade and brought it over there. It was something that was interesting, asking them how they decided which ones they liked, because obviously the California facade is an interesting one as well. And sometimes they said it just came down to a committee deciding which one they liked. And I think sometimes they flipped a coin and made their decision. But the Spooky Mansion along the Hudson River is now in Tokyo. They do not have Frontierland, they have Westernland. Very much the same thing as we would call Frontierland at Walt Disney World. You can see the Country Bear Jamboree over there. Some of the attractions like the Country Bears, they did translate into Japanese. It made it tough as you went to some of these as an American to see some of the shows. If you had not been familiar with them from the Disney theme parks, you would not know what was going on. For us, it was kind of a kick to go in, listen to it. You could still, follow the show, of course, but there were others, and I'll mention more in details about, the problem in some of them trying to find it when they were new to you. So again, we had Rivers of America. Looks very familiar going around out there. And another view. Very wide streets. They built them to hold the predicted crowds, and there were days out here, just like looking at pictures of some of the World's Fairs, where these streets would be packed pretty much to capacity. They did have a capacity limit on it. They would turn you away and tell you to come back another time.
Yeah.
So if you could, you would definitely pre-buy your tickets before you went out there. And we have the Mark Twain and the Riverboat Landing. Again, you'll see probably 90% of what they picked up came out of Florida and the rest from California, because Florida had already been bigger, built upon and improved upon the Disneyland version, but there were different odds and ends mixed in. So we have the Davy Crockett canoes, we have Tom Sawyer's Island, the Mark Twain going around, and you'd be hard pressed to swear you weren't at one of the U.S. parks. They did an amazing job. They're not stint on the cost of this thing at all, and really went out of their way. Mark Twain coming around the river bend. And then the park had been open for 2 years at this point in time. What's really interesting to me is when you compare pictures like this to a similar picture from Disneyland for 2 years, the trees and everything had been much more mature here. And that was one of the things they had done, was they had started all the time that they were building the land for this, they were starting to grow trees and giant tree farms and that, so they were not bringing in scrubs and saplings like Walt had to do at Disneyland. They were able to do much more transplanting and have a filled in sort of environment. And again, little details of things. It's a Japanese park. 99% of the people there were Japanese, but it's a copy of an American park. So down below in the barrel, it says no fishing in English. So that was the dichotomy that struck me in these things, how interesting they carry some things ideally. And I don't know, from my experience, quite a few of the people in Japan do know enough English that they probably know it was no fishing. But I just found it kind of interesting that they went to that sort of detail. And I must have been fixated on the riverboat ride at this point in time. The Westernland Shooting Gallery, familiar, of course, to the theme parks, and you could get out there and plink away. This was another one that became a big issue, and how do you get guns over there? And we had to get the, ATF, the tobacco and firearm people to help with some of that. The Mile Long Bar, it's a feature that you've seen at both parks, done with mirrors to make it look much, much bigger than it is. And we're looking over at the Tiki Birds, again, the Florida version of it. And when you went inside, it was translated into the Japanese. And this is my tour guide that safely got me there and got me back for the adventure, meeting up with Big Al. And she went over to the fellow that was playing the Chip at one point and said that I had done Chip in the United States. So the next thing I know, I had Chip glued to my butt following me around, and he finally got back to the tour guide and asked her, you're not supposed to talk, so he did this on the QT, asked her if I thought he was doing it right. So I was giving him a thumbs up, and he was very, very happy to hear that he passed muster with a American version of Chip. All sorts of the other characters coming out, dancing around. The Disney movies have been real popular in Japan, which was one of the big reasons the park was a success. That when they took some of the stuff over to the park in Shanghai, a lot of the characters were not as familiar because the movies had not been as widely distributed. But here in Japan, they had all been out on home video. They had been shown on television, and the characters were instantly recognizable. So the kids you can see here are running out and meeting Friar Tuck and just having a great time with it, just like kids would be in any of our parks. And again, the Tiki Birds, very majestic, soaring into the sun. I was lucky in this first day I went out, the weather was beautiful. I've gone out there in other days where it's pouring rain. They can get some real weather off the bay there. But this day was just an absolutely gorgeous day. The Jungle Cruise was interesting because you had two levels. You had the train ride going around at one level and the entrance to the Jungle Cruise at another. So They combined both in here for the Jungle Cruise and for the railroad. You can see the train up above and down below, just over the trash can, the sign for the Jungle Cruise. And it was, again, this sort of thing was so strange when you come around a bend, and it's sort of familiar, but very strange. And more of the Tiki room. Going over looking near Pirates, and this was interesting because you had a good feeling that you're in the Florida version of Adventureland with this sort of motif, but all of a sudden, poof, you go around another turn and you're out at Disneyland and New Orleans Square, and they went way out of their way to duplicate this particular one. And going down, luckily they were able to duplicate the iron, lace iron work up on the buildings. Just did a really nice job. You'd really swear you were in California. And this was, again, Pirates done California style, the way we had it out here before the entrance area was changed and you went in. So I was glad to go in, and I think I have some pictures of the Pirates and thinking about my eyeballs and stuff. So the day's getting to an end and the sun's coming down on Tokyo Disneyland, starting to get later at night. Ran into the Crystal Palace to have a nice dinner. Being a World's Fair fan and a Disney fan, having a recreated World's Fair Pavilion at Disney, I had to get some pictures of it. All the vehicles recreated, brought over. I imagine the shipping companies were very happy with this particular project, all the things that were brought over. And again, interesting that the sign is there for Adventureland and it's in English, as the narrator in one of the movies mentioned that most of the signs were in English and a few Japanese signs. It was not what I expected. For people that have worked in Japan, you'll know that they're much more reserved or staid than Americans. When they went out to Disneyland, they really became just kids at heart, like all the rest of us. So, you know, people were out there, and I talked to the people in my office over there, and, you know, they would grudgingly admit at first that they had been to Disneyland, and then they started opening up, and, you know, it just became enthusiastic chats with them as far as their experience out there. And then you'd finish that talk and then go back to the somber, facade that, we saw in most of our meetings. And we've got King Arthur's carousel down at the end. This little kid down at the bottom doesn't look like he's enjoying. They're probably being told he has to go home because the day is getting late. And they picked up some of the theming of again, taking some of each thing. We had the carnival style look at Disney Land at first, and then at Disney World. Now, by the time they did this, Fantasyland had been rebuilt at Disneyland, and surprisingly, they decided to go with some of the Disney World facades instead of the Disneyland facades. So again, it was a real mix and match of what they were doing with these things. But brought over the carousel horses. I don't know where they obtained the carousel for this one. I don't know if this was a vintage carousel refurbished. Maybe when we're doing the chat, some of the others that worked on it might know. I don't know if the horses were all new for it as well. Now, here's one thing that was very sad in a way. The Mickey Mouse Review. It had been one of my favorite attractions at Disney World. And the Japanese said, we really, really want that. And the Americans did not want to go and spend the money to make a copy of it. So the Japanese basically just bought it. They ripped out the Mickey Mouse Review from Florida and put the whole thing over here and brought it over to Tokyo. So it was really kind of neat to go in and see a quote, old friend, unquote, there. But it was just sad because it left a tremendous hole for me for many years in the Fantasyland experience out at Walt Disney World. And sunset comes. You can see people over there get just as tired and worn out as they do over here. They had a number of nice, comfortable benches strewn around the property. And by the end of the day, you could not sit down because almost every bench was covered by somebody recuperating from the day. And I think I have some, one or two. Oh, you know, I do have some electrical parade and other shots coming up. Again, Meet the World was an interesting situation. They wanted to do the history of Japan, and this was all done, rightly so, in Japanese. But if you sat in the last aisle of it, there was headphones that you as a Westerners could sit down and listen to. And they go through the whole history of Japan and founding and the arrival of the American fleet with Commodore Perry. And as one of my British coworkers with me on another tour mentioned, they get to World War II and say, a dark time fell over Japan, but that's all over now. That was the entire mention of that point in history. So we were all wondering before we went in how they were going to address that piece. The lights dimmed. They said it was a dark time. It came back. So this show, unfortunately, is no longer there. It's been since taken out, but it was the one of the ones that was very interesting to see because it was the only AA show that I think of that I can remember that we did not have in one of our other theme parks. So it was kind of fun to see it. I had seen mock-ups of it. I'd seen some of the things being built before I left Disney, but I had never had a chance to see a run-through of it. And the fact that they did provide English language for the folks sitting in the back was much appreciated. And again, entrance into the show area. And we took a ride through Pirates, and I was good. I did not do flash photography, so I was happy how these came out when I pushed them on the computer. But they went way out of their way to make it all look like we were in beautiful downtown Anaheim or Orlando. They built their own Blue Bayou restaurant. I was not able to get dinner reservations this first night that I went, but on later trips I was able to go back there, and a carbon copy of ours out here, and very well done. They had other things that were also new in the Adventureland area. They had this stage set up. I had been there during the day, and they had one of the typical Disney character and singing, dancing things. Wasn't able to get a picture because it was absolutely just so jam-packed. But as I was walking back out to the exit at night, I made sure I got a picture of it. Just again, I liked all the architecture and the lacy style and everything they'd done for it. So not just having a stage was kind of neat, but having a theme stage that kind of blended in somewhere in between Adventureland, you know, the colonial days of different things, but it was also done with the sort of motif that fits in a bit with the Western Bazaar area. Then the electrical parade came along, and it was very interesting to see it because they had the narration was all done in English. It was very unexpected. The announcer comes on and goes thousands of lights and synchronized electro-synthomatic whatever sound. That whole introduction was done in English, and at the end, ladies and gentlemen, the Main Street Electrical Parade. What was also interesting, they had greatly improved the technology that's been used by the lights at Disneyland at this time, which I was going to more often than Disney World, having left the company. They also added some additional floats that were new. So like this one was not out at Disneyland, and it was really a spectacular. The light, this picture kind of caught the light very, very well. Amazingly bright swan, and then she had about 6 or so little cygnets, or I think that's what you call a baby swan, following along behind her. Just a kind of spectacular view. So you can see some of the other ones coming along behind her. So it was really neat to see things that were familiar to us and also new elements that they had added to the parade. Skipped inside, went over to see Small World, which was done again like the Florida version of it. The loading area looked very familiar. And you go back here and you swear you were back at the 1964 World's Fair. And at this point, this was the 3rd Small World, and now there's one, of course, in every one of the parks. It was just kind of fun. And again, the flashback of going into the World's Fair thoughts. For Ken Carpenter and the others who are fans of the Tomorrowland movie, maybe this is where you would go into the entrance into the Tomorrowland in Japan, their version of the Eiffel Tower. And by this time of night, you can see the crowds are pretty much done. The boats are going through pretty empty, but I was determined to wait until the very last minute until they pushed us out the door, because at this point, I didn't realize I'd be going back to Japan as often as I did, or I'd be able to go see it again. So I wanted to make sure I could. We then hopped up on the Skyway, took a trip on that. You can see the electrical parade down below. And just a nighttime view as we're walking back out to the exit on the way out. I have no idea what that company does, but they were selling ice cream cones like mad along Main Street, people getting one last snack. And it was interesting because at one point, you know, you'd have somebody eating an ice cream cone, and next to it they were having, edamame or other Japanese things that you wouldn't find being sold in one of our snack stands. So that is it for that particular view. Let me just go down here real quick. I'll jump a few years later to another set of pictures. And right with you. Okay. Sorry, I have to just bring up that file folder again. As I said, I was lucky. I went over there a number of times. It was when the fellows in the office realized I had worked for Disney, they would say, hey, could you come out and give us a tour? And I said, you could probably do a tour here better than I could, because I've only been here 1 or 2 times. But they loved using the excuse of having the American in from the States to pad the expense account, shall we say. We always went to the nicest restaurants in Tokyo. We went to all sorts of things. And it was not uncommon. Tokyo Disneyland, just like the US theme parks, would close early at night, certain times of the year. Other times of the year was open later at night. So at times they would say, hey, why don't we just go out to Tokyo Disneyland for dinner tonight? Okay, twist my arm. So there were a bunch of times I didn't take pictures because I wasn't expecting to go to Disneyland. And there were some days I just didn't want to go because I was dead ass tired, but they wanted to go because now they could expense a trip out to Tokyo Disneyland. And that's why I said it was really fascinating. People that were really buttoned down, focused executives, I'd be going out there with them, and they were just having a great time, you know, riding pirates and singing Yo-Ho. So hopefully I'm sharing the screen again. Everybody see Tokyo Disneyland again? Okay, great. So we're walking in here. This is 1989, 2 years later, and there were some changes. They had added a few new things to the park. It was continuing to expand. And again, very popular thing. You can see much more of the lines are longer on this particular day than on other days. But the area was still wide enough that you did not have crowds. Off to the left, you could go and get snacks that were built in there. And I don't believe they had beignets like they had at California. I can't remember that 100%. I thought there was something else that was being sold in there. There was also construction signs up around the property because they were going off and expanding various areas. We'll see some of that when we get to Tomorrowland. But the riverboat's still chugging around faithfully. Again, I must have been on a riverboat kick on some of these trips. I think they were just starting to work on Big Thunder at this time, if I remember right. I think that's what the sign was going for. You can see it off to the right there. I don't remember if that was open or not, or if that was an addition. One of my other coworkers would have to correct me on that. And again, you can see more of the colors that were being done here with the facade for Small World than we had it in the US. And there were things that they added in here, for example, as I mentioned, there was a stage that was done in front of the Small World, and these were where all the lights were. And rather than just put ugly light towers and plop them down unsightly, they built these kind of interesting houses. You can see the lights through the glass windows, and they tied it into the colors of Small World to kind of blend it in. And I think Small World now might have changed vendors or sponsors during the 4 years between these shots of pictures. and all sorts of the dark rides were transported over. This was an interesting one. They had decided that they wanted the Snow White Grotto, which had been built out at Disneyland. People are probably familiar with the story how these statues were donated by an Italian who wanted to give Walt Disney a gift. And they realized that the dwarfs were the exact same size as Snow White. So putting them together would have been a problem in terms of, the scale was all wrong. So she is put up there, and with the difference in perspective, you don't realize that they are different sizes. She looks like she's bigger and taller and further back. She's not as far away as one might think, but it effectively fools the eyes. The Japanese came out, loved it, so they had to make exact casts of these particular statues and bring it over there and recreate the grotto area. The castle at this point had a nice new addition added to it. It was Cinderella's Castle Magic Journey, was it? Or I forget what, I wrote it down here somewhere. The Cinderella Castle Mystery Tour. And this was a really strange experience when you went in. There was a sign, you went in down below. It was all in Japanese. So I had to go back later online and read what I had been through. But basically, you went down, the magic mirror was in a room full of pictures of the Disney heroes, Cinderella and Snow White and that. And then the magic mirror said, hey, where would we be if it wasn't for villains? And all of a sudden, the pictures on the walls turned from the heroines into the villains. And you ended up running through the castle, and they would tell everybody, yell at the top of your lungs and scream, and you'd run into the next room. It lasted a number of years. It's not there anymore right now. But it was really kind of fascinating to me because I had no idea. All of a sudden, you'd be in a room and they'd be talking, and everybody would start screaming their head off and run into the next room, and all you could do is follow behind them, wondering what on earth this whole thing was about. Interesting plaque. There were two of them, of course. I've got the English version and the Japanese version just off to the right. Just as Walt started the dedication of Disneyland to all those who come to this happy place. This was the version that Card Walker did for Disney, Tokyo Disneyland. And it was kind of fun to spot that out there. And the construction was underway, except they were expanding, they were doing new things, and they were, at that point in time, very busy building out the Star Tours experience, which again was new to Tokyo, new to the US parks recently, and was being added out here. And since then, they've gone and done many other additions. So I'm going to stop here. Had some other pictures we could do some other time, but don't want to keep everybody all day. I also want to look at chat and see how many mistakes that I made. So they still have Skyway buckets? No, like here in the US parks, gone, maintenance costs and operation. Yes, all the vehicles have the driver on the right side. That's the way they drive in Japan. So they made that switch over there so people felt comfortable to it. That was something that it took me by surprise, because I was driving a Toyota Celica at the time and got over to Japan, and the Toyota Celicas have the steering wheels on the other side. So kind of different. Meet the World was, which area was Meet the World? If I remember right, that was in Tomorrowland. If I remember right, it was right where Tomorrowland and Fantasyland were meeting. Okay. The Tomorrowland, you're a big fan of the Tomorrowland movie. I like the beginning. I still, when I get into the part where the futuristic people had killer robots that were shooting policemen in the city streets, I was trying to figure out why a utopian world would need to have a killer robot police force. So anyway, thoughts from others that have been there or worked on it, or just general comments people would like to make. You should all be able to unmute yourself.
Did you say the park was only 115 acres?
I think they said it was 116, something like that.
That's smaller than California, isn't it?
Larger. California is 7. I'm not an expert, but I believe California is 75. Florida is 100 or 100 and a quarter. And Tokyo Disneyland is about the same size as Florida, the theme park part of it.
Right. Yeah, the theme mentioned was 116, and from what I understand, sitting in meetings, They purposely did that to say they had the biggest and the best theme park in the world at that time. And that's part of why some of the avenues and everything were made so big, because they couldn't afford, if they took the theme park, to fill it all with attractions, because they couldn't engineer new attractions at expense. So if you spread them further out and make them a little bit further apart, you can now have the world's biggest theme park, but have less attractions, because when it opened, and for the first number of years, it had less attractions than Disney World did, but it was in more space than Disney World, and therefore it was bigger than Disney.
So that 115 acres, does that include the parking areas also?
I do not believe so.
No.
Okay,
No.
so they had, and it's open in the winter and the cold months?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, there's pictures of the park that you'll find out there if you search online, Tokyo Disneyland snow. And it doesn't snow all that often, but it does. And there's one picture somebody did where Donald Duck is lying in the snow and joking that he's frozen to death. So, one of the theme characters. Yeah, Dave.
So I did work on the park. It was a challenge as we were building Epcot and the equipment for Tokyo Disneyland at the same time. I mean, literally, I was at the studio and had moved from WED at that time to the studio. So I was their chief electronics engineer working for Don Iworks. We built a total of 225 16 millimeter, 35 millimeter, 70 millimeter projection systems. Actually, we built, I think, 2 that went on IMAX projection systems as well. And so one of the challenges of Tokyo Disneyland was it was located in an area that had 50 hertz, 100 volt power versus our United States standard of 120 volt, 60 hertz power. So that created a surprise that got solved, but still when the Small World figures were built, they're built with electric motors that run synchronous at the speed of like a clock at 60 hertz. Well, that determines the timing of the figure movement. And it was out of sync with the audio because the audio was timed for the US version. So that problem got solved. In the case of the projection systems, knowing out front, we didn't want to build a different version for use in Japan versus Epcot. I basically said, okay, well, we're going to make them where they'll work at 50 or 60 hertz, and we'll build into the base of the projector a auto transformer to convert the power from 100 volts and boost it to what the equipment expects, which is 117 plus or minus 10%, 120 volts. So the projection equipment for Florida and Tokyo Disneyland was built exactly the same, except in the base of the projector itself, it had this conversion transformer. We actually built a generator system that would provide the expected output voltage of 100 volt, 50 hertz. And so every piece of equipment that went to Japan was tested on that system, set up in the machine shop and threaded up, and all the projectors were run as if they were going to be in Japan. So one of the surprises, you were talking about the eyeballs, one of the surprises was we didn't realize, we shipped everything with power cords and with interconnecting cables. So for example, the CircleVision 9 projectors, we shipped the interconnecting cables made to length to Japan. I got this call one day, or I didn't get the call directly, but Don got the call that said, we need Dave to come to Japan because CircleVision is not working. And I found that like, well, wait a minute, it worked fine. We had preset it up at the studio. We ran the whole thing as a system. What could possibly be wrong? So there was phone calls back and forth. And of course, at the same time, again, we're building Florida. So I was traveling to and from Florida, and I really didn't want to go to Japan. And that's not because I didn't want to go there, but it was a commitment of several weeks to take time out to go do that. Anyway, I ended up on the plane, went to Japan. First day that I got there, I think we arrived on a Saturday. I got my interpreter to take me out to the park, and I pulled out. I went to the CircleVision show. and went up to the projection booth, pulled out my pocket screwdriver, looked at the cables, realized they weren't the cables that we supplied, but the Japanese had replaced them. So I took the connector off on the cable apart and realized that the cable material itself wasn't the correct number of pairs and shielding and so on that the interconnections required. It took about a week to wade through all, we're talking about the difference in language, but there's also a cultural difference. We were very aware of that going in. And so I kind of had to work my way through the chain of command. Finally had I think it was a lunch or a dinner with the vice president of engineering for Hitachi, who had made the cables. And on the napkin, and it was a paper napkin, thankfully, I drew a little schematic of what we needed versus what we had. He instantly discovered, you know, he was like, oh, I get it. Well, why don't you just use our cables? And once that decision was made by him at that level, they installed our cables and everything worked perfectly. So it was, you know, something that was pretty unexpected, but that was something then once we knew that, we started realizing that just the fact that we had supplied power cables, there was either a code issue or something to do with that they wanted to use their own interconnecting cables and power cables. The other thing that was of concern, in the case of Florida, we had actually brought one of the maintenance guys from Florida to the studio for about a year before we built that equipment to be trained and be familiar and provide suggestions as to how we could make it not only better, but more maintainable. The new projection system for Epcot and for Tokyo Disneyland was vastly different than that used for Walt Disney World, in that what was used at Walt Disney World in 1971 was pretty much the state of the art in those days. And it used the electrical power system to maintain the interlock for synchronization between the projector and the sound machines, which were different. In other words, they were separate, located in another area, and they were connected by cables. So for Florida, having worked on that part, one of the major problems was lightning and the reliability of the power at the opening of the park. Every afternoon, a thunderstorm would come by, the power would go off, all the equipment would lose their interlock. And so a person would have to go to each projector and each sound machine and communicate by radios and resync, basically run everything back to its start mark, because the bins for the tape and the projection were continuous. So if it happened to stop, lose power 2 minutes into the show and it was a 20-minute show, you had to wait 18 minutes to run the film back to start. Well, that was a huge problem. So when I moved from WED to the studio and ended up with a job to design the new system, I decided that I was going to propose something quite new, which was to use servo motors and electronics to synchronize the equipment. And so the new equipment had a microprocessor built into it, and you could load it up with film and push a button and the equipment would know that it was at the home position. And if the power went off or something was out of sync, the equipment would resynchronize itself. So that was complicated. And the thing that Don Iwerks did at the time that just was brilliant, we were all concerned that our intellectual property, in other words, how we were building this, would be stolen. Now that may sound silly, but in that time, in 1982, so at the studio, we basically said, no, we're not going to give you copies of the source software. We will give you backup copies of the program so you can reload it. And no, we're not going to give you copies of the circuit board manufacturing drawings. We will give you exploded parts diagrams like you get with your dishwasher as a consumer that explains how to take it all apart and how to repair it. And so Don created a department, and that's what we did. Well, it turns out that the studio was one of the exceptions to just send them the drawings. I mean, they bought the park, just send them the drawings. Well, we were concerned, and rightly so, that somebody would reverse engineer the product. And in so doing, we were giving away that knowledge that we had worked very hard to gain over the years. So that's what we did. It was very successful. But imagine my surprise when I'm on my trip and I go to the maintenance shop and I find one of our encoders completely disassembled on the bench. And the guys, I mean, they had taken the wiring harness off of it, and they had all the gears and all those laid out on this nice, it wasn't velvet, but it was this nice linen tablecloth kind of thing. And the guy says, well, we got it all apart, but we don't know how to put it together. So it was like, so my answer was put it all back in the box very carefully, send it back to the US, and we'll fix it for you. And then the last thing was just as a project, the fact that it was all in metric versus English, that the construction was, I mean, the Japanese had been building buildings in like modular, kind of a modular approach of like certain sizes. You didn't go off that size. Well, that created some significant problems when we went to build projection systems, because we were used to a screen that's like so many feet and so many inches away. And it was like, no, that's not the way we built it. You know, we've changed it to our metric modular system. And so it was a challenge, but one that we were able to solve. And we did send a team there to do the installation. And at the opening of the park, everything was flawless and it worked perfectly. But having worked on it and doing it at the same time as Epcot was a challenge, because also at the same time they were making the movie Tron. We were doing things in Don's group for the feature animation group. And so we were doing this multitasking, both in Florida at Disney at the studio and at Tokyo Disneyland. And it was great. I mean, it was one of those things. I think if we had known how tough it was going to be, we would have never done it, but we just didn't know any better. And Don provided the leadership, and it was great.
It was crazy times for sure, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So thanks. Appreciate all the information on that, Dave. And for folks that have not worked there, be with you 1 second, Brock. For folks that have not worked there, you cannot confront the Japanese head on. You have to be very diplomatic and be very tactful. And you know, my father worked for a Japanese company, and I was lucky that he had given me, you know, some pointers and how to deal with it. And one time, as I mentioned, I had to go to Japan twice in 1 week. I had been over there for 2 weeks, came back, got told they weren't doing anything I had told them to do. I flew in on a Sunday. You know, you bring a dishonor amongst yourselves. Anybody want to get fired, pick up a box and leave. Anybody want to stay, I'll take you to lunch. Went to lunch and I flew back at dinner time. So I was in Japan for 1 day. It was insane time. But
great photos, by the way. They were just, compared to the ones that you usually have to put together, I thought your photos were just amazing. So thank you.
Oh, appreciate it. Like I said, the first time I went over there, I knew I was going to go to Tokyo Disneyland. Other times, the Japanese were crazy, and I joke about, you know, sort of joke about them with the expense account. And this was not just Japan. When I went to Norway, man, we had to go to the best restaurant in Norway. Go to, you know, Germany, the same thing. But they would do things like one day, you know, what are you doing on Saturday? Oh, I don't have anything planned. So go to Tokyo Disneyland during the day. Then we went to the sumo wrestling for dinner, and then we went to the Akihabara electronic district at night. You know, it was like packing everything in, and you know they loved it because again, if they all went along and you know you could have the dinner, it was great fun. So you know they said, hey, can you get us into the Blue Bayou restaurant? Oh, okay, I think I know somebody, because they could never get in. Dave?
I did have an interesting experience, just as you mentioned, when I arrived there at the airport, and I had traveled a little, but you had to stand in the line that said alien, And of course, it's like, what? That's right. You're an alien. And from the moment that I got there until the time that I left, and actually the plane reached the point of no return across the Pacific, I kind of felt like Oriental Land Company, they were in charge.
Oh, yeah.
And when they said to me, oh, this 2 weeks has been great, we need you to stay another month because we have some other things that we'd like to talk to you about and have you help us with. And I was like, no, I'm committed. I've got a trip to Florida planned the week after when I come back, and I really need to do that. And I've got to tell you that as we were flying home, I kept waiting, not for the plane to turn around, but maybe not be let off the plane at LA, because you definitely get that feeling when you're there, when we were there working on the park, that OLC was in charge and you were there at their pleasure, and you might not be able to leave when you thought you were going to. Not because you couldn't, but just because of the politics that were involved. So
Yeah.
It was a great experience, but I was glad to get back and take on my other duties.
Yeah, I remember the signs that you mentioned for Alien, and I felt like I was in a Star Wars movie. But it's one of the things you remember. My first thought that Japan's going to be really different was at the airport. I had gotten off the plane, went into the men's room, and using urinal, and the lady came in to clean the urinals and was standing next to me scrubbing the urinal. I'm trying to do what I need to do, and she's just standing there, 1 foot away from me with a brush and everything. And I'm like, man, you don't see this in the United States.
Right.
So that took an awful lot of getting used to, that you go into a men's room with women attendants, and they weren't shy. If you were in their way, they would tell you to move. So real quick before I get to you, Brock, somebody mentioned in the chat about Meet the World. It was supposed to be at Epcot, and they did build out a theater area for it. And then for whatever reasons, it was decided not to build the show, whether it was cost or the political message of it or whatever, it was not built. And for years, that area was used for the paint department to store paints and tarps and other odds and ends in there. So that had been a planned feature for Epcot, but was not built out there. Brock?
Yeah, I was, involved in the installation, was over there for about 7 months during the installation of the park. But just some notes I took, kind of fill in some other detail. The mix of the parks that we were talking about, Disneyland, Disney World, when the Japanese originally approached us and came over to do that park, they wanted a copy of Disneyland because 99% of their people had been to Disneyland, not Disney World. They all knew that. But at the same time, they wanted as big as Walt Disney World because they were expecting huge crowds. And so what we had to do was convince them that, well, you can't take Disneyland and blow it up. It doesn't work. Everything gets spaced out and none of it kind of works the same. So it was a kind of a mix of things we could make familiar with the facade sometimes, but using other things. The castle needed to be a bigger castle, because they wanted some of the stuff that was in the castle at Walt Disney World, and they wanted to put it in the Disneyland castle. There's no place to put a restaurant. That doesn't work, things like that. So that was kind of an interesting, we had to kind of walk them through what had to be done and then kind of work with that. Tied into that to a certain degree, one of the interesting things goes along with what David was talking about, the difference between our way of doing things and their ways. Of course, there was the metric in English, inches and feet, which we did all our drawings in, and then they had to be translated over there, and then we had to check all their drawings to make sure they had converted them. But their structural steel was a different size than ours, both in its shape and its overall weight and bulk. And so they started the building, and they approached the architects first and said, our steel is bigger. And so what dimensions should we hold to? Do we need to hold to the outside dimensions of the building or the inside dimensions for the shows? And of course, the architects all said the outside, which was really true, because if you know Disney, a lot of those facades have a lot of pre-made fiberglass molded rock work, stonework, things like that existed from Walt Disney World and or Disneyland. And we were going to be using that. And so if you change that outside dimension, none of that would fit again. But on the same time, once they pushed everything in to keep the outside dimensions the same, suddenly the show department was never told about this. So we get over there to install the shows and nothing fits, or in certain places things don't fit. So I spent hours over there with chalk going into set pieces and saying, okay, cut this part off, we'll cut this off and use it over here, we'll spread this over here. Things were just moving all over the place to try to make it fit and work within the smaller space we had inside. And there were some real tight spaces because the ride tracks were already designed and laid out and on the ground. And so you had to really work that out. So that was kind of an interesting thing to do. A little side note, again, of the way they were doing things, and it was alluded to again in what David was saying about their metric system, or I mean their system of making things, the same kind of relationship to one another, and prefabricated. A lot of their sidewalks over there, if you walk into town, you'll notice they're not poured concrete. They are concrete slabs that are laid like stonework and stuff like that. So they don't work with much poured concrete, at least at that time they hadn't. And so we had a lot of poured concrete in that park. Going to the castle from the International Bazaar, there's a huge concrete area, and there was a pattern in the concrete that's very common. You'll see it over here a lot of times. It's kind of a fan shape, it kind of, you look at the concrete, it looks like a bunch of little fans. Well, the Japanese looked at this and they couldn't figure out how we had done that. And they started thinking about it. And when our people went out to see the first day they were doing the finish work to see how it was going and to see if it was meeting our standard, they're out there with a bunch of pots and pans and setting them on the concrete and turning them and twisting them and lifting them up and doing it again. That's what they interpreted, but that must be how they did that. And we had to teach them how to use the trowel to make that fan shape. So it was another little funny little story that went on there. Your comment about Frontierland versus Westernland, that had to do with the fact that there is no translation of the term frontier. The Japanese, that's a foreign thing to them. There was no frontier in their country. It was a small country. So the idea of this somewhere else kind of area in the frontier, further west, in our case, United States, didn't exist. But it was, what they did know was the Wild West and cowboy movies and all that. So it became Westernland because there was no way to translate what Frontierland was. And I believe one of the reasons they had done that I was told that they had done the World Bazaar, the big glass and steel cover over it, relative to the weather, was that because they expected heavy rains at times, they thought people this would give them a place to retreat to if they didn't want to stand out in the rain, because the whole main street was wider and bigger, and it would give a place where they could retreat to after the rain was done, then go back out. I don't think it's ever really been used that way. The people just put up with it because they're used to living with it in Japan, in Tokyo, and that sort of thing. So
could you imagine 60,000 people all under that roof trying to wait for you?
Yeah, that would have been fun. Well, they expected some of them to stay in the rides, I guess, but I don't know. But that was part of the idea of they could retreat to there and be undercover in inclement weather, and then when the weather passed, they could move back out again. And so the thing about the guns and the shooting gallery, if you know that shooting gallery in Tokyo, that is an electronic shooting gallery. It's the first one we did because they would not allow pellet guns or anything like that in Japan. And so they had to convert and make the whole thing work electronically, to even recording, I believe, the sounds of pellets hitting things, if I'm not mistaken. And David might know something about that. But it was, that was developed for that park and has since been adapted, I think, into some of our other parks.
Do you remember if that was done in-house, or is that still McGlashan Enterprises?
No, that was done in-house. As a matter of fact, a good friend of mine, Randy Carter, who worked for Disney and now is retired in Reno, he was in charge. He was the show designer for that. And I ended up in Tokyo replacing him. He was supposed to relocate and install all the shows, or be in charge of installing the shows. He ended up contracting cancer, and I was put in his place, but he was able to, he survived all that and was able to get over there for the installation of that particular show. So he did get back over there. And I was trying to see if there was anything.
Again, when to prove to the Japanese they were not real guns.
No, they would not allow, even like a BB gun. No way. You can't have any guns in that country. And it was a challenge to come up with this whole thing because nobody ever done an electronic shooting gallery in that way to try to make it look like a shooting gallery that we're used to, like the ones at Disneyland and so on. The trees on the berm that you were talking about, they came in and just way overplanted the berms, but it was a planned overplanting because the idea was once it did start to grow up, they had certain trees that would be removed and either just removed completely or sometimes be able to be relocated somewhere else where they needed mature plantings. Versus Disneyland, they just put up some trees and eventually it became the berm we all know today where it's just a forest out there. They wanted to start with that forest there, but there was a lot of stuff. That berm was planted way before the park installation began, versus Disneyland, the berm was planted almost at the end of all the installation. So,
Right.
So anyway, a few notes. It's just some things that stuck in my mind from what you were saying.
When was the last time you were over there?
Last time I was over there was around 2000, 2001. I was the show designer on what's now the Winnie the Pooh ride over there. And I went over for some of the installation just on a couple of trips to oversee it. That was at the time I was transitioning out of Disney. My wife and I had moved up here to the Sierras and had opened a bed and breakfast. And I had told them I can't relocate because I can't leave her alone there. I was commuting back and forth each week between the Sierras and LA. But I did get over there for that. I was also had worked on Tokyo Disney Sea. And I did go over and see a couple of the shows over there under installation while that was going on. So anyway, that was my last time over there, but I'd made some other trips and it was interesting to see the changes in the park and also in the country. How, some of the cultural things that we had experienced over there were very different now, and just to see things, how they changed. So that was always kind of fun.
Yeah, I think the last time I was over there was about 93, so I've never seen Disney Seas, and if you would ever like to take us there, please do let us know. It's one that looks fascinating to me, and I talked with Dave Mumford and everything about his time over there and stuff, and I'd love to see more of it than what I've just seen on the internet. So
yeah, unfortunately, I don't have much because I just went and visited because I'd already given up my responsibilities there, taken over on the Winnie the Pooh ride because I wasn't going to be relocating. And so I don't have much I could show there. I would love to see that park finished too, because I did spend a lot of time involved in the design as a show producer and stuff like that on that park. And it was a lot of fun, but never got to see the fruition of that.
Well, when this pandemic ends and it's safe to travel, it's on my list. Now, Rich, I think you said you worked there too. Anything you'd like to reminisce about? You should be able to. You're muted, Rich. You should be able to unmute yourself.
How's that?
That's better.
I just wanted to mention that the production of the audio tracks for that park, the audio department was running two shifts. The day shift was doing Epcot and the night shift was doing Tokyo Disneyland. And there was a lot of soundtracks, a lot of work in that whole process.
Now, when they did the soundtracks, like when they redid the one for, say, Country Bears, was that recorded here, or did they record some of it in Japan? Where did the talent come for some of that?
I wasn't a part of that, so I couldn't tell you for sure. So rather than give you the wrong information, I just say I don't know.
Right. Again, it was crazy times. Get to you 1 second, Carrie, although I'm sure that's not Carrie. Yeah, right with you. Yeah, it was crazy times. Like I said, as Dave mentioned, if anybody asked at the beginning of this, would you like to do both? It kind of reminded me of the whole thing when they came by and said, we're going to build Tokyo Disneyland. It sort of reminded me of Walt, telling the guys for the 64 World's Fair, we're going to build a little boat ride, and first you out of your mind. And all of a sudden, Cart comes up and decides, hey, his swan song is going to be building this park. And we're not going to hire extra people to do it. And we had no more physical space to build everything out. we're just going to have to do what you said: second shift, day shift, night shift, that sort of thing. So it was exciting times, but crazy. Carrie,
Well, oh,
Yeah.
sorry,
Bill, this is Tom Brooks.
Todd. Yeah, I know.
I know. So I had three quick things. I do have Carrie and I just went to Tokyo Disney about a little over 2 years ago. So I have tons of movies and slides from that trip that I could share if I could send them to you and you could kind of go through them and see what you want. And then Bill, did you attend the Bruce and Dave show at MFC when Bruce was on stage connecting with Mumford about in his office? Remember? Do you remember that? He says, we have this brand new technology where we can it'd be like a Zoom, right? At the time. And we're going to connect with Dave. We've got him in his office and Dave's like, hey, and we're waiting and they had on the screen, like technical difficulties, now connecting, technical difficulties. Oh, now here. And then all of a sudden Dave appears on the screen. He says, hi, everyone. I'm here at Tokyo Disney in my office. And then all of a sudden, remember, the screen started shaking and and he says, let me look. It appears there's a commotion outside. And he takes the camera and he shows everyone outside. And then there's Godzilla and he's attacking Dave's office and he's caught in the power lines. And it was just hysterical. Those guys were so funny and they went, to such great lengths to entertain us.
They were. I tell you, I spoke at a couple of the NFFC and other conventions.
I was just wondering if you were at that particular one.
Yeah, but I had one rule. I never wanted to follow those two guys.
Yeah, really.
Away. When they're throwing the things into the audience and everything else, or passing out samples of his dirt stuff in little bags and
leaves from the tree, the
plastic leaves. Yeah.
Yep.
Great.
And then lastly, I just wanted to, I kind of assume everybody here knows about your new book, but I just thought maybe you could talk a little, give us the synopsis on your
good.
book.
So my page show came through. No, I just happened to, yes, the new book, which will vanish here in front of me. My new book does come out on May 10th, and it's the 1939-1940 San Francisco World's Fair. So this was, you have this is the 13th of these books I've done on World's Fair. So you get things down to a certain system or whatever. And you work it out in a certain period of time. You get your visits to different museums, everything planned. And then God drops a pandemic on top of you. And every museum closes and nobody can get to anything. And literally, I had some great help by people that said, well, I'm not supposed to go into the museum, but I have to go in next Tuesday to get a new laptop. I'll see what I can get for you and help with it. So it took about an extra 4 months to put it all together. And there were some sources that were I was never able to, get access to, but it was fun to do it. As I mentioned earlier, they built an entire man-made island for it. They did all sorts of things. It's real big for Disney fans because that's where Walt did his first World's Fair show at that particular fair. So May 10th, again, it's on worldsfairphotos.com. I didn't stick it on my other site, billcotter.com, but if anybody orders it before May 10th, I'm sending in a free Golden Gate International Exposition gift with every one of them. And it was fun to do. Appreciate you mentioning it. And Tom, if you would be interested in hosting one of these and going through a more modern look at Tokyo Disneyland, I'd be absolutely willing to work with you on that. Because again, I had a great time. I think I was there about 6 times over the years, but my knowledge stops in 1993 when I stopped going to Tokyo. So if you have a more modern look of that in Disney Seas, please let me know and we'll see what we can do to put you on the schedule.
Could we have a vote? Do you remember I wrote that book on the University of Earth, and Disney is just a monster when it comes to a great, conscientious environmental company, And so I would ask people, if I was going to do a presentation, would you rather hear about Disney's involvement in the environment, or, or my, family slides of Tokyo? And I
Why not
Both.
both? We could do
Both.
two.
both.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah. It makes it easier for me. I can sleep in that morning.
Combined. Yeah, that way I could take up a whole 20 minutes. Okay.
Yeah, let's chat offline, work it out, and what dates work for you and work for me, and we could get it together. I'd love to see both.
We could work in an extra minute of Zorro.
Well, that makes the silent Z. We have two other folks with their hands up. The first one was Kathy, and then we'll do Carolyn. So Kathy?
Okay, I think you can hear me now.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention that I was there for a part of the day in March of 1992. I was actually on a China tour and just did a quick stopover in Tokyo on my way home. And impressions that I remember from that long ago. Number one, as you were waiting to get into the park, Jack Wagner's voice was was there saying, welcome to Disneyland, that type of thing. So that was like welcome home when you heard his voice. And then when you went in, the thing that you showed, the cover over part of Main Street was really kind of a different view. It was a shock to see that, I remember. Pirates of the Caribbean, I went to see that, and part in English, part in Japanese. I remember the part where you're just going to go down, the pirate's foot is kind of there, yo-ho-ho, that was in Japanese. Also, Golden Horseshoe Review, or whatever it was called, that was partly in English, partly in Japanese. And then kind of a question for the folks that were kind of building it. I remember this, and a comment was made. This was at the Tiki room, waiting in the outside, in the seats in the outside. All of a sudden you felt like, oof, a bit of a warmth thing. And I was told that there was kind of a warmth heater underneath some of the seats waiting outside. So I was curious if anybody knew anything about that. That's it.
No, nobody seems to remember that.
I seem to recall something about putting in heaters for those seats. It was something, I don't remember the story. It was just, when she said it, it's the first time it's like, wait a minute, that triggered a little bit of a memory. But yeah, there was something, they did that because they were afraid they were going to be, because they were like stonework. They were, built into the whole kind of volcanic look to it. And they were afraid it was going to be too cold in the wintertime. So they put in some kind of a heating system of some sort so that you wouldn't be so uncomfortable waiting. And one other comment, we've been talking about doing Epcot Center and Tokyo Disneyland at the same time. At the same time, we also did New Fantasyland at Disneyland. That was the little forgotten project that occurred during that time, but it was a huge project because it took the whole land and completely redid it. So all that was happening at the same time. And I was involved in all three of those projects. So it was very interesting.
Right. And Caroline, you've been patiently there.
Oh, that's all right. I have two things. One for David English, just a reminder, you were talking about having to redo, that the rides would reset themselves in Florida. We were actually in one of the rides that got hit by lightning. The Epcot ball got hit by lightning, and we were in the Pavilion of Energy with the dinosaurs. And the power went out, except the dinosaurs didn't go out. They were still moving around, but nothing else was happening. So they brought the lights up. But the guys came and just pulled up a little computer thing in the back of the seating and rebooted the building, and then we all were able to walk out. So that was kind of a cool memory of that. The question I have is for you guys who were working on Tokyo Disney, and maybe you were able to work on this based on experience in California, did you have to take into account the earthquake issues in Japan? And what did you do?
Well, yeah, they did have to do that. I mean, I was more involved in the show side of it, so there was nothing done to the show pieces for earthquake. But it's not any different than California in a sense. I mean, earthquakes can happen here too. But they did, because of the landfill and the whole thing there. You have that liquefaction issue that can come up. There's a lot of huge piles that go down to the bedrock down at the bottom of the bay to lock all this stuff in. But yeah, that all had to be considered. But that was more on the structural end. A lot of the Japanese engineering took care of that. And that's what why the steel I mentioned earlier, the steel was bigger and everything. That had to do with their ways of dealing with the earthquakes and everything.
Yeah, I was wondering about that when you mentioned the it being built out on the bay. I immediately wondered, okay, they have earthquakes a lot there, so whether or not that would be an issue.
Our projection equipment typically is bolted down and restrained, certainly for Disneyland, and the same for Florida, just from a safety standpoint. I do recall, though, as you mentioned, that something that happened in Tokyo that was a real surprise to us, and that is well, I'm sure it's such a surprise, but one of the things that we adopted to gain the film life, just the fact that these films are going through a continuous bin of, and they're protected in that bin with rollers, so the film surface never really touched anything, and that's to keep the film from getting scratched. So that was invented by iWorks at the studio, and it really enabled the people to be able to see the show after show without having to have it on platters and rewind it during intermission or whatever. But one of the problems was that you didn't want the film to break, because of course, if it did, then you were down until somebody could go out there and re-splice the film. So Eastman Kodak was developing a Mylar-based film, where regular film is acetate plastic, where Mylar is very strong. And so we were printing on Mylar-based film and loading up the loop cabinet. There was one loop cabinet in Florida, at Tokyo, that had yet to be bolted down. Something happened where the film, the cabinet, again, it wasn't bolted down, the projector was started up. The Mylar film was so strong that it picked up this 100-pound cabinet and pulled it into the projector system. And that was at the point where and then the projector system overcurrent device tripped, and nothing bad happened, other than we realized first time how strong that film actually is.
Was that 70 millimeter film?
Well, we had 35 millimeter. This particular one was a 70 millimeter print, yes, because it
sounds like IMAX.
The larger, well, IMAX is actually, okay. So IMAX is actually 70 millimeter tall,
right?
But it's 15 perforations long, whereas, and it goes through the projector horizontally.
Right.
Whereas 70 millimeter film in a theatrical is vertical, and it is only 5 perforations tall. So it's the actual image size for 70 millimeter print in a normal theatrical projection is like a fraction of the size of IMAX. And the other thing
that's pretty strong film then.
Yeah, it's very strong film. The other thing that's amazing about IMAX is that the film rate for both IMAX and our normal projection rate is 24 frames per second. So because the regular film is only 5 perforations tall, it's going at 24 frames per second. But if you look at the speed of the actual film material going through an IMAX projector, since it has 3 times the length and it's going at 24 frames per second, it's effectively running at 72 frames per second. So it's really, really zipping along. And if a film breaks on an IMAX device, whether it be the camera or projector, you have a huge mess in a very quick period of time. But it is an amazing seeing IMAX projection versus standard projection is just, no wonder it's so clear. And it also takes a very bright light. So IMAX projector is usually using a 15 kilowatt lamp, whereas a normal projector, even the best ones that we built, were using an 8 kilowatt lamp. So just getting the heat away from anyway, it's complicated, amazing. There is no digital projection that can compete with an IMAX film. Even their digital IMAX pales in comparison to seeing that. And there is an IMAX projector theater at Universal Studios, not the studio, but in the theme park. Actually, it's not in the theme park. It's at Universal Studios
City
Plaza. Yeah,
City Walk.
Yeah, City Walk.
City Walk. Yeah.
So if there's an IMAX film and you want to see it and you live in Los Angeles, go to that theater because it's the best possible experience.
Speaking of theaters, Dave, how about you and I and a couple of the other guys buy out the Cinerama Dome?
There's a guy, actually, he's been on your call, Strohmeyer, is like Mr. Cinerama. And there's going to be a point, and it's not a question of if, it's only when, that dome will be available again. And I was talking to him about putting on a special screening of, the Cinerama films and show them on film, which they could do. I think Dan Sherlock's on this call. He could tell us. But it is just an amazing, it's amazing to see those films because they're still just spectacular.
Hi, Dan.
Hi. Dave Strohmeyer is finishing the Cinerama restoration of The Wonderful World of the Brothers Grimm from the original 3-panel 6 filaments. It will come out on Blu-ray and so forth. And there was in the works plans to show a screening at the Cinerama Dome. Unfortunately, Pacific Theaters has closed all Pacific Theaters, not just the Cinerama Dome, but all the ArcLight around it and all the other ArcLight theater operations, as well as just the regular Pacific Theaters. Dave is optimistic that someone somehow will get the dome, at least the dome, operational and working again. I'm not totally sharing in his optimism because it's a complicated issue. But be on the lookout for the Brothers Grimm Blu-ray in a few months. I've seen previews that he's worked on, and it is fabulous. You forget how good the quality was of that movie.
I'm really looking forward to that. I had seen it with my Boy Scout troop in the dome out on Long Island, Syosset, or where it was, and really looking forward to seeing it again.
Yeah, Netflix is right across the street, just south of the ArcLight complex, and they are not totally hurting for money. And I'm crossing my fingers that they might like a few extra screening facilities.
Yeah, I'm actually hopeful that ArcLight, somebody else will buy them, because for those of you not familiar with the Los Angeles area, but certainly who go to the movies, ArcLight had a policy of no commercials prior to the film. And they had reservation seating. So you could you buy a ticket online, pick out your seat, show up 5 minutes before the show, walk in, sit down, didn't have to sit through all the commercials. They had a premium theater experience, so their projection was top notch generally, and good sound systems and excellent. I mean, I'm used to seeing films from my experience at Disney in a studio screening room that is superior in terms of quality, both the sound and the picture. And ArcLight did a very, very good job of trying to replicate that experience. And they had a number of theaters throughout the Los Angeles area. They were owned by, I think you're right, Dan, they were owned by Pacific Theaters, and they're shuttered. But I'm hopeful that some other company will buy them. And I mean, all those resources are there for the taking. And so I'm hopeful that will get reinstituted, because it definitely provided, like, if you want to go to the movies and you don't want people, I mean, they allowed you to take food to your seats and all of that, but it was definitely a premium experience, and I want it back.
Maybe Quentin Tarantino will buy it or something. He's a huge fan of it. I see two of Carol's friends here, and Yuko said arigato, so I'll show you how bad my Japanese is, but hi gozaimasu.
おはようございます。ビルさん、とっても面白かったです。It was very interesting. I really enjoyed it. I didn't know anything behind the scene story, behind the work. I'm just amazed and admire amount of time and effort and thought and ingenuity went through to make that Tokyo Disneyland so successful. I'm just amazed, and I'm so thrilled to hear all the work that you guys did behind the scene.
Yeah, it was a fun thing. As Brock mentioned, they first wanted to build Disneyland. And besides the issue of Disneyland not scaling right, one of the issues you had to convince them they really wanted to build more of Disney World was we still have the molds and models and everything for the stuff that we had used to build Disney World. So if you wanted to rebuild Cinderella's castle, that was really a pretty easy thing to do. You want to rebuild or build Sleeping Beauty castle, you'd have to start totally from scratch. So it was much more economical. You know, I mentioned the facades, much more economical to build a haunted mansion from Florida than it would be to build a haunted mansion from California, because none of the old stuff had been saved all those particular years. One other thing I didn't think to mention during talk, another thing that made it really interesting for me to go to Tokyo Disneyland was the merchandise. They had very, very high caliber merchandise of all sorts of different things than we sold in the American parks. And we mentioned they had the Mickey Mouse ears and that sort of thing, but they had all sorts of other neat little figures, and I've got some of them scattered around here still. I'd go over there, you know, when I knew I was going to be able to go out there, I'd bring basically an empty suitcase and just fill it up with stuff in the park. But they really, you know, here we were selling really cheap figures of this and that, you know, push them out by the millions. They were content to sell things by the thousands at a higher price, but they would put out some particular items and they'd go out on, you know, sale almost instantly. It was astonishing. One of the things they did was they put out a special postcard. Oh yeah, you've got one of the figures there. Which one is that, Tom? Sorry, you muted.
I bought a few tin toys while we were at Disney, so this is the biggest one.
Yeah, I've got all sorts of things, but I mentioned I collect postcards from all the parks, and it became very hard that every year around Christmas time, they would put out a special edition Christmas card for the Tokyo Disneyland, and they're just sold out. I mean, there are so many Disney fans over there that people just went crazy. And then they had big days like you have Golden Week and you know, some of these other incidents like holidays that just become packed beyond belief. So it was a huge success. Were you able to get out there yourself at any time you go?
So
did you get to go visit Tokyo Disneyland yourself?
No, I have never been there, but I hear nothing but the rave for the Disneyland. I mean, people really, really love the Disneyland, and as you mentioned that the operation is done by Disney. I think that the image and high standard are all kept in original form, and I think that was wonderful. But it was so interesting to hear all the politics and cultural difference and so forth. Everybody had to kind of tiptoed in.
Something I have to keep up with.
I thought that was so funny.
It's too bad she couldn't have been your interpreter.
You know, it was really funny because, you know, I'd say something like, all right, I want to go to Tokyo Disneyland. And all of a sudden I have 10 people volunteering to be the interpreter because now they could get paid to go out there and do it. Or like when I went to Expo 85, the World's Fair, same sort of thing. Yeah, gee, I think I might like to go to a World's Fair. Yeah, okay. Because, you know, the Americans going to pay for everything. It was great. Dave?
I would have volunteered.
Well, Eisner made a presentation to Japan for something, and his voice was her voice as the interpreter for him.
That was a home video thing.
Disney home video.
Yeah, I had one interesting thing with my interpreter. We had gone out there one day and we had a really wonderful time, and we decided we were going to take a taxi back into the city. The train wasn't convenient that hour. And we got in the thing, we were just talking back and forth, and all of a sudden she starts screaming at the driver in Japanese, and I have no idea what's going on. And she said basically he was taking us on the very, very long way. I think we were going to go back to the hotel via Kyoto or something. And she had just heard her and me speaking English and figured we were just dumb American tourists. And she realized she was being taken for a ride. So she screamed at this guy and, you know, but you bring dishonor about Japan and everything. So we got to the hotel. I've never seen anybody bow so low. I mean, he was just absolutely horrified that she had kept calling him out on it. Because not just getting called out, but getting called out by a woman. So
yeah.
1 second, Brock. David is put his hand up.
Yeah,
So,
just a couple of things, and in no particular order. You kind of skipped by the fact that the scale of Disneyland is much smaller than Florida. So you might want to talk about that. The second thing is that, again, the merchandise that's over there at the time, and this is 1982, when I came back, I had purchased for my children these little games, Donkey Kong and Mario, and that they were totally new to the US. And people, the whole idea of a Nintendo game, or, you know, this is like a long time ago, but bringing those back, and my kids just loved those, and nobody had ever seen anything like that. And next, there was Transformers, and these robots were like, I mean, they were, okay, so this is like 18 inches, quite large, made out of metal that would transform from cars to this big, gigantic robot. Never, and again, think about this time, 1982, it preceded anything like that in the US. And then the last thing, the whole business with translation. So we had a OLC translator assigned to us, and you know, we would say something to the Japanese and then he would or she would relate that. So those guys were paid by OLC, Oriental Land Company. And at one time I was working with a colleague who spoke Japanese, and he said to me, wait a minute, that's not what you said. So they would be careful to word it like you said, oh, this is stupid. I wouldn't say that, but had I said something like that, that's not how they would have said it. They would have been much more respectful and much, but in some cases, it got lost literally in the translation. So I often wondered about that. And then later I was sent to when I was working for feature animation, I was sent over to a presentation where Roy Disney was previewing Fantasia to a large audience. And we got on the airplane, and you know how the stewardess typically gives you this little run through of here's where the safety devices are and all of that. So it was Japanese Airlines, and that went on for 2 or 3 minutes that they're talking. And then they got on in English, and it was 15 seconds. And I'm like, wait a minute, what is it that they heard that I don't get? You know, why don't I get that same spiel? So I asked this guy when I was back there for the feature animation thing. He was an American married to a Japanese person, spoke fluent Japanese. And at that point, I felt like, well, I can ask him about this without being disrespectful. And he said, you don't understand, Dave. The Japanese language is a very polite language. And often it takes a lot more explanation, like, don't get out of your seats. That's not what they say. They say, please make sure that you're careful, and in order to prevent any injury, you need to do this and this. And by the way, don't get out of your seats. So the fact that there's a different cultural, I mean, vive la différence, that we're all different people, different cultures. But when you come to explaining something and you're trying to say this cable doesn't work, if the guy who's translating doesn't have to be technical, the person, the girl, they don't always get it right. And so that was another challenge. So anyway, I'll let you speak, but.
No, but here, just to let you know that Gary Trudeau was following you on your trip to Japan. So can everybody see this? Honey, why is it that I got the distinct impression you were taking liberties in translating my speech?
Yes.
I had this similar sort of thing. I was over there and in one of those other Doonesbury things, he's there telling some telling some joke about something, and he goes on and on with his joke, and finally everybody laughs, and he says, "I slayed him." Well, what Honey is translated was "American make joke." Everybody laughed. And I was giving a presentation, a whole theater full of people were talking about something, and I made some joke, and the translator translated, and everybody laughed. All of a sudden, all I could think of was "American make joke." Everybody laughed, and I had to stop and remember what the hell am I speaking about, because I was so fixated on that cartoon. You mentioned those little games. They were about yay big, and I brought a whole bunch of those, and there was one where they had Mickey and Minnie in an egg toss game.
I was just going to mention that.
Right. Carol started playing, then our kids played. I still have it around somewhere, and I brought it back and I showed it to somebody. The next thing you know, I became like a bulk importer of that stuff. I had also had a watch that played "It's a Small World" that I had bought, and I showed Dick Sherman. It was, oh my God, I need to have that. So the next thing you know, I'm coming back on the next trip from Japan, and they opened up the thing, and my suitcase was full of egg toss games and Small World watches. And the lady just looked at me and said, "You people are strange." So I'm sorry, Brock, you had your hand up?
Yeah, it was just again about the translation, and you're right. It is the fact that it's a more polite language, and the people in general are more polite.
Yeah.
And so we would be talking about, a problem we were having with some part of the installation, and I'd be giving direction on, well, what if we did it this way, or could we do this, and do it this way, and the translator would come back. The guy would say something, the translator would come back, and he says that will be very difficult. And I'd go, well, yeah, I know it's going to be a little more difficult, but just do it. And what he's really saying in the polite way is, no, I can't do that. But they wouldn't say that because that's going to insult you. So it's very difficult. So you had to learn the little nuances of that sort of thing. And also in the translation, and David probably experienced this too, sometimes you'd be talking about something, especially when it was technically oriented, and you would use maybe a colloquialism or just a certain framing or a certain set of words together to describe something, that there was no way to translate that in Japanese. And so you're listening to the Japanese translator speak, and all of a sudden halfway through their Japanese, you hear English words for about a sentence, and you learn very quickly, okay, I got to figure out another way to say that so they can translate it, because that meant there was no way to translate what you just said in that part of your presentation, because it didn't relate, sort of in the sense of Frontierland versus Western land or something like that. So there was a lot of interesting things. And the last little comment is, again, the games you were talking about, especially the Transformers. I remember being over there, our kids, we relocated with, a 4-year-old, a 6-year-old, and an 8-year-old. And the Transformers was a huge thing over in Japan at that time. And as I said, the models or the toys, they bought a bunch of them and loved them. And when they brought them home, all their friends wanted to know, well, and I'm going like, this would be something I think would sell in the United States. But I never followed through with any thought of that. A year and a half later, that was the big thing. And you couldn't get them at Christmas time because they couldn't import enough of them. It's like, I could have been a multimillionaire if I followed through.
Yeah, Greg, I was just mentioning he had gotten copies of the watches and the games and stuff. And again, I think about it, man, if I had just set up a business and had 100 of them brought in a week or something, I could have done it. But, hindsight's great. Imagine if you had gotten the Pokemon, franchise.
Wow.
So Carol worked on Tokyo Disneyland too, right? Carol, with the figure finishing.
Both Tokyo Disneyland and Epcot, since they were at the same time.
Right.
But I did such a low-level job. I mean, I never got to travel. I got to travel to Disneyland. That was my big business trip. I never got to do a lot of the stuff that you guys did, where you saw everything in person to check on it and all that.
Did you work with any of the people having to train them how to feather the birds or anything?
I didn't train. I was actually doing paperwork attached to figure finishing. I kept track of their work hours and things like that. It was not a very creative job, but it was my entree.
She says that, but yet she was given the thing. They wanted to train her how to do a Tiki Bird, so she knew what she was talking about, documenting. So they gave her a worn out bird from the Tiki Bird show and said, go ahead and document it. So tell them what you did to the bird.
I made it into a jailbird.
It's all done in black and white feathers.
It was just I mean, I am a creative person, but my job wasn't that creative. I mean, it was great, except at the end, I got laid off like everybody else. So there you go.
Well, somewhere in our boxes of treasures in the garage, we have a black and white striped tiki bird. So someday I'll bring it out. We'll put it at the Van Eaton Gallery's auction and we'll make it work. And so anybody else? Again, it was appreciate folks joining. And next week we have Werner. Werner is going to be taking us to another overseas park, and he's going to be taking us to Hong Kong Disneyland. So anything you'd like to add, Werner? You're muted.
No, we're going to have to do a little bit of a run through this week to make sure it works.
Yeah, we'll find some time and schedule. So
looking forward to it. Looking forward to it.
Dave English asked me about the 3D glasses again, where you get those, and I couldn't remember.
Yeah, if you go to worldsfairphotos.com, go to Zoom, the same place that you pick up the link if you're not on the weekly mailer. And you go down for the presentation for the May presentation on 3D. There's an address there to send a self-addressed stamp envelope, and Dave Bossard will happily send you back a set of 3D glasses. So suggest that everybody, Rich?
Yeah, I wanted to mention that one of the things we did a whole series of training tapes on how to fur and feather the birds and how to fix skin buttering to replace the fish skins and stuff like that. We did a whole series of training tapes, of course, specifically.
I got to see the people in person that had done all that stuff, and they were amazing. I mean,
do you have a copy of this tape, Rich?
No, I don't, but they're in the library.
Yeah, no, it was fun. I'd go and visit Carol for lunch and wander through and see what they were building. And I particularly remember, Ward Kimball being out there, for some of his transportation pavilion stuff and everything. And real fun days. Tom?
Yeah. A friend of mine in Albany, where I used to work with him, and we were best friends at work. Married a young lady from Japan, and one of the funniest things he told me was, he said she'd start to argue with him, and she'd start in Japanese, and he would go, "Oh no, you don't. We're not arguing in Japanese. It takes too long."
That's funny. Yeah, it was really different. Like, so I was lucky. I had my father worked for 40-some years for a Japanese company, so he gave me all sorts of tips on how to work, and even the little things like when they hand you the business card, you not just take the business card and put it in your shirt pocket because that's dishonorable. You hand it with both hands, you nod, and then you put it on. And I found it very helpful. I put them on the table, and that would let me know who's sitting around where. And I had all my business cards printed in Japanese on the reverse side. And that really got, boy, the brownie points you got for that, the fact that you had taken the time to have Japanese language business cards to hand to the people. That was, the print shop, when I asked them for it, was like, what? And we did it, and that was very well received. So, and I like working in Japan. It was fascinating. I really enjoyed it. And like I said, when it's safe to travel and do that sort of thing, I'd be more than glad to go. And my son's really big and interested in go and see the Studio Ghibli park when they finish that. So great time. But yeah, the red goes over the left eye. But we are going to have a really nice presentation if all goes well. I forget the date in May. It's coming up. But Dave Bossard, who did the book on Disneyland in 3D, is going to give that. He's going to talk about restoring the images and doing it all. But we're going to do a major portion of that talk in 3D. So if you're, there you go, Dan. So if you don't have a set, you can buy them real cheap at Amazon, or you can write to Dave and he will happily send you a pair of it. Now, once Dave has outfitted you all with 3D glasses, then I can do Expo 67 in 3D or the 64 World's Fair in 3D, because I didn't have as many free glasses to send out to everybody as Dave Bossard does. Dave?
I would be remiss, as you mentioned, people were so polite. The city of Tokyo was so clean. We took advantage of the one weekend, or maybe there was 2 weekends on the trip to do some quick traveling. It was a lovely, even though I was only there on that trip for a total of 2 weeks, it was amazing. And the people were so kind, and it was great. It was difficult. It was hard, but usually things that when you accomplish something that's terrific, it's usually not easy. And I think that the opportunity that I had at the Walt Disney Company was an amazing one. And for that 30 years, the whole thing that you were talking about, oh, let's just do it. I think that went back to Walt originally, and he passed in December of 1966, and I started in January of 1967. But his legacy, certainly Don Iwerks had that, oh, well, we need to do this. And we would just somehow get together the resources. I mean, the Tahunga building is a great example that they ran out of space in manufacturing at the Wed Mapo complex in Glendale. And so they rented this large tilt-up building 10 minutes away and built it out and staffed it with people in order to do all of that work. And of course, when the work decreased and the people were laid off, and the building became a warehouse and storage. But it wasn't a great experience. And certainly the experience with the Japanese, they were, it was a positive, it was different and difficult because it was a learning experience for me. But that, in my career, that was helpful because later on, I was working for feature animation, and we were building the studio tour out in Florida. We were building a animation studio in the city of Paris. There was the Disneyland Paris park. I was and we were building a new building for feature animation in Los Angeles. So I was traveling between Los Angeles and Orlando and Paris 3 times every month. I think that year I had 200,000 frequent flyer miles. When you're doing that much of it, it isn't as much fun as one might think, because it's just very intense. And in that case, at that point in time, likewise with Tokyo, you're in different time zones. So Tokyo is the next day, 14 hours later. When I was working on Paris, it was morning in Los Angeles, lunchtime in Florida, and go home time in France. So just the cultural differences and the time zones, but I wouldn't trade it for the world. That experience was just amazing.
Yeah, I had staff in England and staff in Tokyo. So I ended up having a studio phone installed at the house, because I would get up in the morning, call England, see how they were doing, drive to the studio, do the work, and then come home at night. I could talk to Tokyo. But yeah, the travel does wear off. I've got 99 trips into England so far, and I'm looking to do number 100.
Wow.
Yeah, and like I said, I went to Tokyo twice in 1 week. It was insane. But yeah, it was great fun. You mentioned Tahunga. I was part of the acquisition team on that facility, and it was, again, had to find it in a real hurry because, as you mentioned, everything was exploding. There was no place to put anything. And I remember we went in there. I forget who the former tenant was, and we found the building and we're looking and try to figure out what would work and whatever. But I was also just walking down the street to the other facilities that were up and down that street, just to make sure that we didn't have any particular, hey, you guys have any power problems? How often does it go out? That sort of thing. I walked in through the one door, and they were doing all the model work for Battlestar Galactica. And, walked in, and, they were happy to talk. And imagine today, you guys all know how closed shop Hollywood is. I just walked in. Oh, what are you guys doing? Oh, that's a neat looking spaceship. Oh, yeah, let's show it to you. Here's our camera system, and, that sort of thing. And here at Disney, what are you guys doing? How'd you do the black hole? It was today you try to walk into a studio and just start talking shop with them like that.
Yeah, that was the Universal facility. And again, I worked on the black hole and built a motion control system for it. And again, it was very, your cards were played very close to your chest, because we happened to patent that system, but generally the best protection is not to tell anybody.
Yeah.
And so the whole patent issue is you have to disclose exactly how you did it, and you write that all down. But I just, one other comment, just the fact that Disney was when we built the studio in Paris for animation and in the city of Paris, the idea there was that a third of the movie for Hunchback of Notre Dame could be done in Paris, and a third in Florida, and a third in California. And so one of the systems that I put in, and it was a first of its kind, was a video conferencing system that would connect Paris and Orlando and Los Angeles in real time. Now this is in 1989, so this isn't like Zoom. You didn't have bandwidth. I had again a nice dinner with France Telecom, where I negotiated that we could get a dial-up line across the Atlantic, so we could use it when we needed it and pay for that, as opposed to having to lease the line. And that enabled us to put it in a video conference system in Paris. Now one would think, so what good is that? Well, prior to that, the drawings in Paris had to be bundled up, packaged, sent by FedEx. They'd have to go through customs. They get to Los Angeles. It was a week between the time that the animator drew the drawing and then the director in Los Angeles could look at it and play the videotape and then make comments and then send those back to France. So a week or two turnaround of that versus video conferencing. So in real time, Los Angeles at 8 a.m. in the morning, and Florida at noon, and Paris at 5 p.m. in the afternoon could get online. They could see in real time the drawings. They could play back the videotape. So I put in a system that was compatible with Los Angeles and the US versus the video system that the Parisians were using. And these guys could have this interactive, literally go into a conference room in Paris, press the button, it would auto dial Los Angeles, and immediately they could see each other and they could interact. And so what happened, instead of being a 2-week turnaround, it was the next day turnaround. The drawings, the feedback they got, they would go off to dinner, come back the next day, do all the changes, and then meet again the next day and be able to do that interactively. Today, international production is a reality because of the connectivity that we have. But this was in 1990, basically 1990, 30 years ago. Well, so the challenges were real, but they were overcome, and the benefits were huge, and it's translated today.
Now you tell me this now, which is really great, because I had to do the exact same thing for Warner Brothers, and if you had told me this 30 years ago, I could have just copied yours. But again, nobody shared anything, so we had the same thing. We were doing all the Tiny Toon Adventure cartoons and that sort of stuff, and we had that animation studio was in Sherman Oaks, but a lot of it was shopped out overseas, and the exact same stuff we could talk about. Well, listen, I thank everybody for joining us. And again, next week, we're going to take a look to Hong Kong. Hopefully soon, if Carolyn and others come through, we'll be taking a look at outer space and those some sort of things. Again, Tom, I'll be in touch with you. We can try to talk about a modern look at Tokyo Disneyland. And appreciate everybody joining. And it's good to see all the familiar faces. And we will say sayonara to be fitting.
Thank you all.
Great.
Good job.
Bye.
Right. Bye.